So, I'm watching part two of this Russian report here. It's focusing on what they're calling a domino effect across central Russia to explain the nature of Russia's authoritarianism. This strikes me as a kind of a wishful thinking by the Pentagon. Um, the truth is that those um, conflicts that exist in these areas are mostly pushed by foreign interests, chief amongst them being the United States. Sad to say that there aren't legitimate concerns, but people don't generally focus their like. If you can find me an example of a legitimate separatist movement like this, I don't think there's ever been one. Like the whole concept of separatism is broadly nonsense. I think probably the closest. I mean, you've got like Quebec or Scotland, and even Scotland is political, and even to an extent Quebec is political, because the United States may want to use that to break the country up, and arguably has in the past. Um, there's not really any kind of good example of this. That's outside of a colonial context, and trying to put what happens in Russia in a colonial context is um, disingenuous, let us say. Um, so the domino theory is, like all domino theories, is nonsense. And I don't think really there's anybody that actually believes that, except for some military strategists in the CIA, which kind of suggests where this analysis is ultimately coming from. Um, the why do they need authoritarianism in Russia? Because it's a huge country. um, it's and let's not exaggerate the idea of authoritarianism in Russia so much. It's not like Putinism is not Stalinism. It's just it's a Western democracy. Um, they have elections. It's just the biggest problem in Russia. I've been over this on other places. The biggest problem in Russia is actually the lack of a spectrum. Um, this is what a lot of outside observers don't really get. The political spectrum in Russia is that you can have Putin or you can have the communists. Um, the opposition party is still the communists, and when we talk about communists in Russia, we're not talking about like it's not Bernie Sanders. Like it's like these are the communists, the Soviets. So the party from the Soviet Union. I mean, it was never outlawed. It never ceased to exist. It's just been in opposition for, I guess, 30 years now. Um, or close to 30 years, anyways. 25, anyways. So I mean, like there's no opposition. And the only real third parties that exist are in the forms of like extreme national. They call themselves liberals, but they're closer to fascists. So you're a Russian and you show up to vote. Well, you can vote for the communists or the fascists or Putin. Well, Putin might not be your favorite guy in the world, but he's better than the communists and he's better than the fascists. So I guess we're gonna go with that. What is he actually? He's a conservative. He's a Russian conservative. But his party is it's a coalition, a grand coalition, if you will, of what would pass for liberals and conservatives in a country like Canada. So, um, or in the United States, if you could imagine in the United States the Democrats and Republicans merging into one party. That might not be so hard to imagine, but if you could imagine that, that would be what Putin is. He's the one party guy, um, and but in order to make sense to put that in a context, you have to imagine that there's a huge communist movement, um, and nothing else. Um, the Western media wants to focus on these these liberal quote unquote protesters. Well, like I say, number one, they don't fit any concept of liberalism that the West understands, and number two, like they can't get 5% in the polls. Um, and we can forget about this idea. I mean, all of the all of the. I don't want to say that the elections are free and fair, but I don't think that elections in the United States are free and fair either. Right? So, comparatively speaking, I don't think we're looking at anything worse, and I don't think the outcomes of the election are significantly different than what the people are actually voting for. Minus, a few, you know, rigged polls here and there designed to, get a point across. I mean, it's a ruling party. All ruling parties, manipulate polling places. I'm not naive about this, right? So, um, I'm not going to pretend that it's perfect there, but I mean, I'm not going to pretend it's perfect anywhere else either. So, this concept of Russian authoritarianism is, I mean, it's historically rooted, um, but it's largely blown out of proportion. I've compared I've compared Putin in the past to Churchill, in the sense that he's kind of a last stand, on a Russian empire that's about to implode, um, trying to reassert something that is probably largely historical, and politically speaking is roughly in that space. Churchill, Bismarck, and the fact that that was 100 years ago is kind of indicative as to where Russia is in its terms of development. That's the big problem with Russia. Okay, it's not the form of government that they have; it's the fact that they're 100 years behind us. Uh, and to have Russia really um, integrate is well, to have Russia integrate is going to require a big change of attitudes. Um, in Washington, first and foremost, but secondly, the massive technological development. Um, Russia is not at the same level of social development as we are, and there's no use pretending that they are. And it's not going to get us anywhere pretending that they are. They are 100 years behind us, and their political system is reflective of that. So, that's what they have. They have a guy in power that has policies that are similar to Churchill or Bismarck. Um, and that's just where they are in their development. So what do we need to explain authoritarianism in Russia? Well, nothing, because to begin with, it's not really there, and second of all, it's just a function of the spectrum. The domino theory that they're presenting is, if somebody in Chechnya manages to pull something off, if anything, the more empirical observation of what we're seeing is that it would create us kind of a groundswell of Russian nationalism. The support would probably behind the president would increase if he was strong enough to take it down, kind of thing. Um, this idea of a separatist ideology in Russia is not actually there. It's wishful thinking by the Pentagon.